Good morning to everyone. It's good to see you, good to be here, and I've been looking forward to covering this material for some time today, and we need to get right to it because I have a lot of ground to cover. We're continuing our study in Family Life series, and today we've moved to the place where we're ready to talk about conflict resolution. And we're going to try to equip ourselves with some conflict resolution skills, how to solve the problem when we have problems, how to resolve those conflicts. We've covered in our study the purpose of marriage, and while marriage, like a diamond, has many faces and many facets, many things, the central purpose of marriage is to represent Christ in the church. Ephesians 5 teaches this very clearly. Ephesians 5, Paul tells us, it's a great mystery, but it's profound, that the purpose of marriage is to demonstrate the relationship between Christ and his people. If your marriage is not preaching the gospel, your marriage is failing. Now I want to say something about this for a moment, because if you watch Hollywood and the Hallmark Channel and whoever else I can pick on, you get the idea that marriage has a lot of other things that define whether or not it's successful. Marriage is successful when your marriage preaches the gospel. Your marriage is failing if your marriage is not preaching the gospel. It's just that simple. Now, if your marriage is preaching the gospel, if the union of husband and wife is a demonstration of Christ and his people, there are a lot of other things that are going to be going good also. But all the things in the world can be going well. Can be going right, no conflict, we get along and we have great vacations and it's all wonderful. But if it's not preaching the gospel, if I cannot see Christ and his church in the union of your marriage is not accomplishing what God said it's supposed to accomplish. Never lose sight of that. That, to me, is 90% of the battle. If you keep that as the center part of what your thinking is regarding your marriage, that will solve so many of your problems. Ask yourself, is your marriage preaching the gospel? Now that we've said that, okay, there are a lot of challenges, right? One of the things we've learned in our study so far is that men and women are different. The Bible teaches us that it takes both a man and a woman coming together to complete the process of being image bearers, and that our unique natures, the unique capabilities that we have, is what makes that work. Men are typically are certain ways, women are typically certain ways, and when they come together, those unique natures bring us together in a way that performs the work of image bearing of Christ and the church. So as we thought about image bearing, each of us having our image bearing nature, that opened up a biological subject that we started a couple of months ago that I want to get back to just briefly. And that has to do with the biological difference between men and women. And I went back and listened. Brother Mike said something to me about it. I went back and listened, and I realized that I was a little hard on the men when I talked about the nature of our brains. I told the men our brains are that we all have brain damage, and that may be true, but the deal is, our brains are the way they are because God means for them to be. And we talked about how that when a child is born, that hormones are released by the mother that causes in the boys, in the men, about 80% of the time, for the neural pathways between the two hemispheres of the brain, for some of those to be dissolved. And what that means is that men don't have as many neural pathways between their left side of the brain and the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain tends to be the side of the brain that has, the decision making, as written down there, math, logic, facts, sequencing, things like that. That tends to be the left side of the brain. The right side of the brain is more the artistic side of the brain. It's where abstract thinking takes place, things like that. Emotions tend to be on the right side of the brain. Both men and women use both sides of the brain. The difference is that men don't have many neural pathways between those two sides of the brain, so we tend to be singular focus, men do. We tend to get on a goal and stay with it. We tend to not think about the consequences so much. Whereas females think about everything. A lot of activity in the brain because there are a lot of neural pathways. And so they consider the consequences of the mother-in-law's flat tire as you're thinking about where we're going to go eat. And men don't do that. Those are all good things. They are. Those are very good things, because there will be a day, men, where you need to not worry about the details and you got to focus on that one thing, like killing the rattlesnake in the backyard, right? You got to think about that. But the mother has to think about a lot of other things. She has to consider all of the consequences and how people feel about things, all of that. And so there's a lot, and it's just a difference in the way our brains work. The way our brains work mean that we look at the world differently. We do. Our perception of reality is different. I can say that because Han and I have been married 39 years, 40 years coming up in August of next year, and I have witnessed it, that we perceive the world differently, and that's okay. That's by design. It's supposed to be that way. So one of the first things you've got to come to grips with when you're working through conflict resolution is just know that by design, God created your spouse to see the world different than you do. By design. Between the two of you, you get a whole view. Image bearing is complete. And between the two of you, you can now represent Christ and his church and preach the gospel, but it takes two of you. So that's important to know, because here's the deal. Because there are differences between us, there are bound to be conflicts. Now, I've been around some of y'all, and I managed to snap a picture of it, and here we are. I want to say a few words to our young people that are looking forward to marriage, or if you have just recently been married. Again, Western culture lies to you about what marriage is. You've seen the movie. There's lots of flowers everywhere. The sun is shining. It's beautiful. The couple are happy. It's all perfect. And just as they embrace, the camera begins to back away and spin around. And it spins around, and the whole universe comes into view until finally you see that heart-shaped light on the outside of the skyscraper in New York. And it's all wonderful. And that's what Hollywood tells you marriage is. And that's a lie. Now, I'm not here to tell you that it's all miserable and suffering. It's not. But the devil has painted a lie about marriage. Marriage is hard. It is difficult. It's a slog sometimes. So young people, don't go into your marriage with that false sense of, oh, I'll get married and all my problems will be solved. No, they won't. You're just going to begin to get into how to resolve some really difficult conflicts. Otherwise, if you don't have that reality of what your life is going to be like, here's what people are going to see when they look at your marriage. Instead of seeing the gospel being preached through the representation of Christ and his people, this is what they're going to see. Does this look like people that are preaching the gospel? Does this look like people that are showing me what Christ and the church are like? Is this you? Is this your marriage? Well, how do you solve this, Brother Mike? You said you're going to have conflict resolution. Now I've set the ground where there's going to be conflict in marriage. We're going to have trouble getting along because we both bring our broken natures to the marriage. So all we are now is just two broken people that are married, right? So how do we solve that? Well, the Bible's pretty clear. The Bible talks about the core of what marriage is. Husbands, love your wives. Titus 2, train the young women to love their husbands. That's it, sermon done, conflict resolution over. Love each other. That's the solution to conflict. You know, the problem is that there's a lot that means. There's a lot of details behind that. But that's it. But here's the deal. Will you love her, comfort her, honor her, cherish her, and keep her in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, saking all others, keeping yourself only to her, so long as you both shall live? If so, respond by saying, I do. And you said, I do. We covered this in our vows. You said you would. You said you would love her. Ladies, you said you would love him. You said you would. You vowed before God that you would. You said you would. And God is going to hold you accountable for that. And if you do, if you love them, and if you represent that love the way you should, you'll be able to work through any conflict that you have. But know this, you're going to have conflict. It's been my pleasure to know a lot of people through the years. Some of these people are in the crowd today. And I've had the chance to visit and get to know all of these people to some degree or another. And I will tell you, every one of them at one point in their marriage looked like that. Right? Terry and Lori, at times, I'm going to pick on Terry and Lori because they are very dear friends. I have seen that. I've seen that. And they're back there going, yep. Me and Han, I've seen that. And you got to work really hard to keep that from becoming that. And everybody's seeing what we're telling the world Christ and the church is like. And the way to do that is that, to love one another. And after 30, 40, 50 years of doing that, then this is what you're going to get. You're going to get Wayne Cable. I don't know if Wayne's here this morning. Brother Wayne, I'm sorry to pick on you like this, but you're going to see Brother Wayne Cable sitting by the bed of Phyllis as her life slips away for months on end, giving everything he's got because he said he would and he did. And I will tell you, I think I've got their picture up there. There were days that it wasn't easy for them, that they battled, that they had conflict. But love said, we're going to fight through this. We're going to make this work. And we've been witness these last months to what that love looks like. Kids, as you go into marriage, someday you'll look back 30, 40, 50, 60 years of marriage. People will look at you holding hands and say, oh, what a wonderful couple and what a great marriage they've had. Remember, there were times it looked like two buffalo going at it. And love is what does it. Love is the conflict resolution. Okay, so that brings us to the text of the day. One of the great texts in Scripture regarding love that Dale read for our hearing this morning in 1 Corinthians 13. Several years ago, Brother Wes gave a sermon on this text, and I have never forgotten that sermon. It's a very good study. What happens in the book of Corinthians is you have all these problems in the church at Corinth, and Paul, the Apostle Paul, brings up somewhat unique words to describe that, words like boasting. And he doesn't always use the sort of the run-of-the-mill word for it. He'll use somewhat of an unusual word. Puffed up is a word. Different words he uses to lead up to it, and then coming out at the end he uses those same words, and those words form something like a bookend, with 1 Corinthians 13 being smack in the middle. It is a wonderful chiasm. It's what you call a chiasm, where both at the end and the beginning of the book it sort of works back to this beautiful text. And what Paul is saying in the book of Corinthians is that all of your problems at Corinth can be solved by love. And so all that stuff he said early, like you are puffed up and you should be humble, for example, one of the things he says. Now he says, love is not puffed up. You see that? 1 Corinthians 13 is a summary of the book. It is. Every problem they had in the assembly, every problem they had with the man taking his stepmother, every problem they had regarding going to court, every problem they had regarding the church being divided. I'm of Paul, I'm of Stephen. All of those problems are solved in love. Conflict resolution is resolved at the doorstep of love. And this text embodies all of those things that love does do and love does not do. It is the practical teaching, if you will, on how to take love and turn it into conflict resolution. So this is the scab we're going to pick off today. And this is where we're going to take time to go through it. I've given this material before. I know some of you will remember it, but we're going to apply it specifically today to the subject of marriage. Love does not. 8 things that love does not. Number 1, love does not envy. The word envy here is an interesting word. It's translated in the New Testament different ways, sometimes in good ways, like zeal, like the way Paul felt about the church at Galatia. James uses this word to describe covetousness, desiring something that shouldn't be yours. The word is also used to describe envy or jealousy. So it's a word that really is a generic word that describes a very deep emotion. Matter of fact, I have written a definition, a very strong, in this case, negative emotion based on a false sense of ownership. Envy Envy assumes that that should be mine. I want it. It's mine. That's why covetousness is very closely connected to envy. And you might say, well, how is this connected to marriage? You do not own your spouse. Your spouse has willingly submitted to you in marriage. It's a voluntary thing. Just like the church voluntarily submits to Christ. We're not robots. Christ does not control us like puppets on a string. And it's that way in marriage. So if you begin having this kind of envy or covet feeling that somebody owes you something, you got to stop right there. We're going to talk a little bit later in our sermon this morning about the spiral of anger. And that's where it begins a lot of times. It's this sin, this breakdown says something like that. It says, you were at home or / work all day while I was blah, 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 doing a blah, blah, blah. And, and the next thing you know, we're blaming one another and we're inferring that I should have owned that time or I should have owned that thing. And we start getting this anger inside. And here's the problem, and I'll step over to the board for just a second. You remember how I talked about the two brains and the connectivity between the two brains? Well, here's what's true regarding the cycle of anger, the cycle of getting mad. When you begin to get mad, what happens is the right and left brain begin to talk. Some fact just took place over in the left brain, and then the right brain begins to, and you begin to have this communication. So it takes a little more for a man to get into that cycle because, he doesn't have as many neural pathways. On the other hand, females tend to slip into the cycle of anger quicker. However, there is another side to this. Once a man is in the cycle of anger, it's very hard for him to get out of it, and here's why. He begins to experience mental activity that he doesn't normally experience. Things are happening that's not normal for him, because the neural pathways are firing and parts of the brain are talking to the parts of the brain, and our sinful nature likes this because I am angry in a way that I don't normally get angry, and now we can't get out of it. Same is true for the female. She slips into that spiral pretty easily, and now once she's in it, once you're in the spiral of anger, it's very hard to recover from that. Now we're going to come back to that as we go. The secret, the answer is don't get in it. And it begins by understanding that your spouse submitted to you willingly. You don't own them. As much as we think that way, it's not a question of ownership. My wife, yes, she's your wife, and in one sense we do own them, but in another sense, they have voluntarily submitted to do that. They stood before some kind of official and said, I will do this. Nobody made them do that. Understanding that helps you not feel this burning anger when things don't go the way it should. Number 2, love does not boast. Love does not say, I told you so. Love does not say, like I said. Love does not say, you should have listened to me. Love does not say, I am always right about these things. Love does not say those things. All of those statements are statements of bragging. I was right. I've been vindicated. You should have listened to me. Love doesn't do that. And we've all done it. Love does not do that. If you want to resolve conflict in your marriage, take those phrases out of your vernacular. Don't say them. Nothing is gained. Nothing is accomplished. In engineering, Wes and I spent a lot of time studying root cause analysis. In root cause analysis, you try to figure out why something broke or what happened, but you never assign blame, because from an engineering point of view, it is of no value. You understand why something happened, but you don't assign blame or guilt behind why something happened, because it accomplishes nothing. Nothing. Here's what it accomplishes. The person that says, I'm always right about these things, they feel better about themselves because they just pumped up their ego. But it meant nothing to the relationship. Don't say it. Love does not boast. So much we could say about that. We're going to have to move on through these. We have 16 of these to go through. Love is not arrogant. The Greek word there is filled up with air, puffed up, swollen up. This is a certain bird that does that. This bird does that. I think there's a fish that does it. It blows themselves, it swells their feathers out. They do this to make themselves look more intimidating than they really are, try to scare off somebody. They sort of puff themselves up, full of yourself, making yourself look bigger than you really are. This is a real challenge because it stands on the knife's edge of something that must happen in marriage. Let me talk about it for just a moment. Spouse, we need to become each other's heroes. We do. Husbands, you need to be your wife's hero. Wives, you need to be your husband's hero. You have to do that. That's part of building one another up. That's part of what God created when He created marriage, us helping one another. The problem, though, is when I try to make myself your hero, when I try to assert that instead of earning it. One of the best moments of my day is when we get that box of furniture that we ordered and the instructions are worthless, and you get it out on the living room floor and there's a million pieces, and Han looks at it and is a little overwhelmed by it, and I take the tools and I go to work on it, and the next thing you know, here's this wonderful piece of furniture. And she will say something like, "Oh, I feel 10,000 feet tall. Why, I've just become her hero, and I had to go through 2 hours of misery earning that, but I did," right? Okay. Puffed up is when I get the box and I say, "Get out of the way, I'll do this. I know what I'm doing. Just don't nobody get hurt. I'll take care of this." That's puffed up, you see. It's arrogant. It thinks I'm more than I should be. A healthy marriage or relationship includes cycles of building up and tearing down. Nobody will be more honest with you than your spouse, and you need to hear them. You need to listen to them. Sometimes people refer to this as don't drink the Kool-Aid, or don't feed the ego beast. We have to help one another some, build one another up some, but we also have to be ready to tear each other down. And never is it a time to be arrogant in that process. Don't take it, earn it. Earn the right to be your spouse's hero. A lot more we could say about that. We will move on. Love is not rude. You might be asking, why, Mike, do you have a picture of an ugly tomato up there? Well, I was looking for a way to illustrate this. I think pictures help form, it connects the mind, the visual and the audio senses. I think it really helps you remember things. Are you looking at that tomato thinking, man, I want to make salsa out of that tomato? No, you're not. I know, because the tomato's kind of ugly, right? It's malformed. It's got like things growing out of the side of it, and it's been stung by a bee, and it grew too fast. It's just an ugly tomato. It's just awful looking. It's out of place. And that's exactly what the Greek word is not rude means. A thing that is out of place. It isn't really where it belongs. This is true for everybody, by the way, not just for married couples. Behave in such a way that falls within the modicum of normal. Uh-oh. Be normal, whatever that means. It means a lot of different things. Because when you act abnormal, you make people around you feel comfortable, and nobody wants to make salsa out of you. Right? Nobody says, oh, I want to be around this person because they quack like a duck in the middle of Walmart, or whatever. This idea of not rude means so much more than what we normally think of rude behavior. What it's telling us is to act in a way that makes your spouse feel comfortable and at ease, and really anybody that you're around. That's a commandment for all of us, but particularly in marriage. Now, what that means is, guys, we have to understand what makes the little lady feel comfortable. What makes her feel at ease? Love says, I'm going to try to be that way. I'm going to try to act that way. Ladies, what makes your husband feel comfortable and at ease? Act that way. If you want your marriage to preach the gospel and not be a bunch of finger pointing to the world around you, learn to make and behave in a way that makes each other feel comfortable. Now, that's easy to say, and that's really going to be different for everybody, right? I mean, it's kind of, each of us are a little bit unique, but figure it out. What makes my spouse feel comfortable? And avoid things that makes them feel uncomfortable. That's, Paul says, that's what love does not make them feel uncomfortable. Rather, it makes them feel comfortable. I just love me. I make sure that me always get what me wants. Love does not insist on its own way. This is an ugly one. Where do we go eat? What color do we paint the walls? What TV show do we watch? Where do we send the kids to school? Where are we going to be buried? A million things in marriage have to be worked out. Let me just ask the question this way. What we're talking about here is just good old pure selfishness. Love is not selfish. It seeks to find what the other party wants and submits to that. But just say it this way. If you, husband, if you, wife, are not making self-sacrificing compromises on a pretty regular basis, maybe this is you. No, this is you. If you're not on a pretty regular basis having to say, yeah, I'm going to give in on that. It's, I'm going to compromise on that for the sake of my spouse so that we'll have this conflict resolution. If you're not doing that on a pretty regular basis, this is you. You just love you. You always gets you way. If you're always getting your way, if you're always doing what you want to do, this is you. And you don't love your spouse the way you should. And your marriage is not preaching the gospel the way it should. I'm sorry, this story's a little bit funny to me. It shouldn't be. In 2016, Colin Nathaniel Scott from Portland, Oregon, went to Yellowstone National Park, and he saw this very vat of water, and he wanted to take a bath in it, and he did. They never found his body because that is not water, it is sulfuric acid. Ugh. So he began, and it's over 212 degrees because when you add sulfuric acid to water, it raises the boiling point. So while that's not boiling like water would be, it's actually about 230 degrees. So 230 degree water with a lot of sulfuric acid in it, needless to say, dissolved his body pretty quick. Because he crawled into a vat of acid. That's the word irritable. That's the Greek word irritable. Matter of fact, it's I can't pronounce it, but it's the Greek word for acid. Caustic. Sometimes our behavior creates an environment at home that's caustic. And the husband comes home from the work and grabs one of the kids and says, they have code language. I've heard, by the way, I've heard this. They have code language where they ask the kids, like, what's the weather like? And one of the kids says, it's fairly partly cloudy today, Dad. Okay, Or, the husband comes home and the wife asks one of the kids, what's the weather like? And one of the kids says, I think there's a tornado on the way, Love does not create a caustic environment in the home. It does not. This is very connected to the other things. All these other things that are not supposed to be happening, when they start happening, what you end up with is a home that looks like a big vat of acid. And there is no surprise when you find out that one of the other spouses don't want to come home. They don't like to be there because it's like a big vat of acid. And who wants to be in that? Who wants to go walk into a thunderstorm? Okay, I know there's some people that do, but you don't want to do that, right? Love says, what does it take to make this place feel more comfortable, more welcoming, more like a place that I want to be? Love does not or is not resentful. And if you've attended here very long, you've heard me use this illustration, and I will use it again because I think it's very appropriate. We all tend to have this bag, right? And this bag is filled with the little things that you did to hurt me. I wish I had a sack here, I could illustrate it. because, we get this bag, and let me see if I can get that sack. I think that's a sack down there. It's not a sack. Well, anyway, just to pretend for a moment I have a bag. I get this little bag, and you said something rude, and I'm going to put that in there. And then the next day, as you didn't do whatever I asked you to do, or you couldn't hear me, and you whatever, and all went wrong, and I'm going to put that in. And the next thing you know, we end up with this little bag filled with goodies. And you know why we have that bag? Because we like that bag. We like it. It makes us feel superior. It pumps up our ego to know I got all this stuff, and you can guarantee, buddy, I'm pulling it out when I can use it. And we had this saying around the house, don't get the bag out. Because here's what happens when you get the bag out. We get the bag, and because we like all that stuff in there, resentful means recorded, all that stuff in that bag that makes me feel good and sort of makes me feel better than you and makes me feel, vindicated, we get that bag out, and we don't just take one thing out of it. No. We just get that bag and we dump it all the way out. And we get it all out on the floor, and we relive stuff from 10 and 20 and 30 years ago, and we have to go through every bit of that misery all over again. And we do that exactly because we don't love our spouse like we should, because love keeps the bag in the closet. Love is not resentful. It does not record. Now, we all have the bag because we're human and we're broken, but keep it put up. Don't get it out. And by the way, if your spouse's bag is a lot bigger than yours, never get your bag out because you're going to lose that battle, right? So, I confess to that one. Don't get the bag out. This phrase is very similar, but with some important differences. Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing. Logotizai kaikon does not take a record of evil. And it has to do with like a mathematician accounting or keeping records, or what an engineer would do in gathering data. A little bit different than the bag, but it is some important differences. Some of us tend to be fixers, right? We try to fix everything. I will confess I tend to be that way. It's the engineer in us, right? It's like the machine is broke. Well, I got to fix this machine. I got to get in there and tinker with it. And in order to properly do that, you must keep a record of all the data. I got to know, when did I change the oil, and when did the thing break last time, and what part broke last time. And I have to begin to keep all the data on what's happening to this machine so I can correctly engineer the solution. That's great when it comes to fixing a backhoe. That's wonderful. Matter of fact, if you own equipment, you got to do that. Keep records on your equipment. It's a whole thing, right? You got to do that. It is a total failure when it comes to human relationships. Marriage is not an engineering problem. Marriage is not a machine problem. Math and algebra and process flow diagrams will not fix your marriage. Stop trying. They don't work. Marriage is a human problem that includes the variableness of brokenness, forgiveness, love, and lots of randomness. That's what marriage is. It's a human problem. It's a human challenge. This guy on our screen cannot write an algorithm complex enough to solve it, so stop trying. It can't happen. If you find yourself being the fixer, like, some of you have seen the video with the lady and the nail in her forehead, it doesn't work. It does not work. We have brought to the relationship two broken people, and it just does not work. We help each other. There's a lot of things we can do, but fixing it like we would fix the Ford doesn't work. It does not work. Stop trying. Love understands that. Love says, you know what, maybe I just need to listen to this problem. Maybe I just need to give some attention and stop trying to fix everything. And I'll learn that lesson one of these days, I promise. Because I am the fixer. That's who I am. I'm trying to fix it. Here's what love does not do. It doesn't feel it. It doesn't say it. It doesn't think it. It doesn't act it. It does not become it. It does not show it. It does not remember it. And it certainly does not celebrate it. It doesn't do those things. If you want to enjoy the benefits of conflict resolution, you've got to stop doing these things. And maybe 30, 40, 50 years, you'll get a handle on those things, right, Dale? You'll begin to get a handle on some of them. And you'll be like some of those marriages we saw in the pictures of people that figured it out, right? That's what it takes to turn your marriage into a marriage that preaches the gospel. Now, there happens to be 8 more things. Because there were things it says it does not do, but there's also things that love does do. It is patient and kind and so on. So let's look at those things. By the way, you can tell I wrote down some notes because my memory's getting bad and I'm worried I couldn't remember some of my stuff. Macrothymio is the word here for patient. It's not the normal word for patient that you read in the scripture. And the word has to do with big air, just never run out of air. There's just, the air keeps going and the balloon never blows up. Think of it this way. Take a breath. Love says, when it comes to patience, take a breath. Here I am. This is where I was going to talk about it. On my cycle, my spiral of anger, and I've started down the spiral, and ooh, here I go, and I'm down to where, once you're down here, it's out of control. You got to go fishing or something because it's over, right? When you're down here. You got to address it up here at the beginning of that spiral as you begin to get angry. And that's what patience is about, right? Patience is almost always me having to deal with your brokenness or me having to deal with some aspect of you that my brokenness seems to be as wrong, thinks of as wrong, whatever. That's what patience is. And so I have to have big air. I got to be able to take a breath. So, understand your own feelings, spouses. Understand how you feel about things. And when you feel yourself beginning to get into that little spiral, stop. Go out in the yard. Get away for a moment. Take a breath. Tell your spouse what you're doing. They'll almost always appreciate it. You say, this is something that I'm going to have trouble dealing with, and before this gets out of control, let me go feed the dog or kick the dog or whatever, Let me get away for a moment, and then I'll come back, and we'll work this out. That's okay, and if your spouse says that to you, thank your lucky stars that your spouse understands what love looks like. Love understands that I have to control my urge. Learning to control your urges will not kill you. I promise. It will not kill you. The fool in me is going to use this illustration because this is the truth. I've always, for a long, long time, even before Han and I married, I had this thinking that you get mad because you want to be mad. And before we got married, I would, somebody get mad at me and I'd say, no, this is not involuntary. You're getting mad at me because you want to be mad, and you are mad because you want to be mad, so you can get over it. Okay, that doesn't work in marriage, I come to learn. I tried that one day, and you're mad because you want to be mad, and you know what? That's true, and also entirely irrelevant. Yeah, they're mad because they want to be mad because they're mad. That's why. And you probably did some numbskull thing to make them mad. Okay, so that's how it is. And the engineer figures out that this is not a machine I'm fixing. Me identifying that little truth in the machine meant nothing. Here's what is going on with that. If I start trying to fix things down here, I'm wasting my time. We're already mad. Walk away, get a breath, and start over again. Patience. Take a breath. Don't just keep blowing air into that balloon until it explodes, because it will. It will explode, and you'll have a mess on your hands then, right? And then when it happens over and over and over again, you end up with a vat of caustic sulfuric acid, and nobody wants to take a bath in that, right? Love is kind. Another very interesting word that Paul used here. And I'm going to take a moment to describe this. Kind. I can't pronounce the word, but it has to be to describe something that's useful or serviceable. Our English word kind comes from the word kindred, which has to do with family. In English, to say be kind to somebody means treat them like family. And that's not really the Greek term. The Greek term has more to do with being useful, being something that's just what you need at the right time. I have some photographs here of a cast iron laboratory sink up in Heritage Hills. And I used to do a lot of plumbing work up in Heritage Hills, and I love those jobs. You go into these old houses, plaster and lath, and some guy with a lot of money in the bank says, do whatever it takes to make this new again. I love those jobs, right? And you're dealing with old stuff that's out of date and nobody has it anymore. Well, you walk up to that laboratory that was installed in 1925 with all steel pipe underneath it and these brass faucets on there. And I'm going to tell you, that little red laboratory wrench that you buy at Walmart, you might as well throw that in the ocean because it's of no value. It is not going to help. You got to have that bottom lab wrench there, which is made by Rigid. It is the only basin wrench ever made. If you don't own that one and you need a basin wrench, throw it away because that's the one you need. That was made out of hardened steel. It's got a hardened steel pin in it. I have tightened 2-inch pipe with those wrenches in a tight spot. And the beauty of that wrench is you can extend it. It's a right angle pipe wrench, basically. You can stick back in a hole, and when you need that tool, no other tool will work. No other tool will do. Because it saves you from busting your knuckles, and I could go on and on and on about how that Rigid brand lab wrench has saved my life on numbers of occasions. Water meters where you can't get to it, you get that down in there, you can turn the key on the water. It's a great tool, great tool. Be that tool. That's what love does. Love says, I'm going to be exactly what you need at the time you need it, instead of walking in and saying, what's wrong with you? You're going to walk in and say, what do you need? Let me be what you need. Do you need me to leave? Then that's what I'm going to do. Do you need me to take the trash out? Then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be what you need right at that moment. You're not always going to be able to do that, by the way, spouse. That's a really difficult thing because sometimes we don't know what we need, right, ladies? Sometimes we don't know what we need. But husbands, that's your goal, right? That's what you got to try. I got to become and figure out how to be what you need. And don't be the cheap Walmart imitation. Be the real thing. That's what love says. And if you start doing that, someday you'll be somebody's photo on a slide of what it looks like after 50 years and what it looks like to preach the gospel. Because love told you, I need to become what Han needs. Love rejoices with the truth is another challenging statement. Really interesting. Let me turn my notes here so I remember what the word is. Synchronized joy rejoices with truth. It's synchronized, or the root word of synchronized is in that phrase. Synchronized. We tend to, when we see the word aletheia or truth, we tend to go to the gospel, and well, we should. But sometimes it really means something larger, more general than that. Sometimes our culture nowadays will talk about your truth and my truth. Dale talked about that recently. And while that's not a correct way to say it, it's not like I have a truth and you have a truth. There is a truth that we all live within, right? It's the world we live in. It's the things that makes us happy, things that makes us sad, things that makes us cry, things that makes us laugh, and so on. It's the things that are true around us. The statement rejoices with the truth means that we must synchronize our truth. Spouses must synchronize our truth. Now, that begins in the gospel. It begins and ends in the gospel, really. But it applies in a million other ways. I'm going to give you an example here of Han and I. And it's the one I know, so I'll offer it. When Han and I married, I found out right away that she loves fall colors. She just loves fall colors. And I struggled for years to understand why would I enjoy going and watching something slip away into the grip of death and describe that as pretty, because that's what fall colors are, right? The green is coming out of the leaf and it's slipping into a long wintry death, and okay, I'm going to go celebrate that. And it was not my thing. But you know what? We got in the car and we went. Matter of fact, we're leaving Wednesday to go to Vermont. We'll spend a few days up there. We won't be here next Sunday. To go enjoy the fall colors. And I learned to enjoy that. And now, actually, I get a kick out of it. I really enjoy it. We have become synchronized in that truth. Meanwhile, Han thought when we married that it was odd that I would want to watch football on Monday night, on Thursday night, go to the game on Friday night, watch 2 or 3 games on Saturday, watch the noon game on Sunday, the 3 o'clock game on Sunday, the Sunday night game, and then say when that was all over, that's not too much football. I love football. I have, since I can remember as a kid, I love football. I could talk about it, Well, Han has learned through the years to begin to enjoy football. She went to this Packers game, and we had a great time. I'll tell you a story about Friday night. Friday night, we went out to hear Breyer play in the band. Bridge Creek was playing somebody. I forgot who they were playing. And it was a good football game. And we were sitting there, and we had the plan that, we're going to leave maybe about 4 minutes left in the game so we can avoid the traffic and go get parked at the right place so we can pick Breyer up after the band at the band hall and so on. And so, the clock begins to tick down, and at 4 minutes till, Bridge Creek, by the way, is driving with the ball, and they're down close to the end zone, and it's 3rd down, and there's a penalty, and it's intense, and they're going to win, but it's still, are they going to win with this last final score? And, so 2 minutes I looked over at her and said, "Are you ready to go?" And she says, "No, we'll wait. Okay, because they still hadn't scored the extra point. Anyway, finally we left, and when I reached to hold her hand, it was sweaty. Now, if you don't know Han, that means that she was emotionally engaged in something, and it mattered to her, and her hand was sweaty. And I loved her from the bottom of my heart at that moment, because she got it. She gets it. That took 39 years for me to see that synchronized truth. And so yesterday, I keep up with the games through the day, and I watch one of my teams play, and then late in the day, I had the Cowboys on. I was kind of watching it a little bit, but something else come up, and we weren't watching it. And so this morning, the very first thing when I woke up, she told me the score, because through the night she had looked up. Now, I got to tell you, that is like the world has just become a square box instead of a round ball. That's a big change. She has synchronized with my truth some, and that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Love figures out how to do that, how to go to the mall when you hate going to the mall, how to do this, that's what love does, because you love the other person, and you want your marriage to demonstrate the gospel. That's what love looks like. Love bears all things. This has to do with covering, like a roof that covers a building. Matter of fact, the word bear there is the word the Greeks would use to describe a roof over a building. Love bears all things. Love says, I've got you covered. When it rains, I've got you covered. I'm going to hold the umbrella over you. I've got you covered. Love says, I'm going to take the blame for that. Love says, I'll accept the consequences for this thing that happened. When we bounce to check, it's not going to be you bounce to check. It's going to be we bounce to check. When something else happened, because we're one, we're married, and it's all we. And I take the blame. That's what love does. Love says, I'm going to cover you when the storms come along. That's what love does. Here we go, She remembers. I know she remembers. I don't know, it was about 10, 12, 14 years ago. We had a youth meeting. And the reason Mai remembers this is because I have managed to not let her forget. We had a youth meeting, and we went down to Chickasha to one of these firefighter things where they teach working together, and you zip line, and I've got pictures of Terry zip lining, and it was a great time we had down there, right? Well, one of the things we did at this youth meeting is we had to do this trust exercise where we stand up on the thing and fall backwards. And so, I was the first one in trying to, nobody's going to get hurt here. This is how you do this, right? And so I get up on the deal, and they're all lined up over there. And Mai's there and some others and different ones, and I begin to drop back. And the last thing I remember before I slammed into the ground was hands kind of grabbing at me like that. I don't know what happened, but I don't think I slowed down much. It was real flat, just like that. And then we got up and did it again, because that's what you do. Trust your spouse. They will let you down. Trust them. They will break your heart. Trust them. They will disappoint you. Trust them. Because that's what love does. Love trusts. It trusts not because it's going to reward you. It trusts because that's what love does. It trusts. When Jesus tells us to do something and we don't really understand it, what do? We obey. We trust and obey. That's what we do. And that's what you should do with your spouse. Trust your spouse. That's what love does. And that's the kind of marriage that will teach the people around you what the gospel looks like. Love hopes all things. I want you to think about the word hope for a moment as opposed to the word wish. Wish means you want something to happen, but you don't have any reasonable expectation that it will. I wish that I would win $1 million, but you and I both know that I'm not going to win $1 million. Hope is wanting something to happen for which you have a reasonable expectation, that you have a good reason to believe it will happen, and that you're hoping that it will happen. Hope all things. A spouse has expectations for you. That's what hope is. Hope is an expectation, a reasonable expectation. So your spouse has the reasonable expectation for good behavior. Think of it this way, let's say it a different way. They set the bar high for you. High expectations. I expect you to pick up your dirty socks off the floor. That's not very high expectation, but you got to start somewhere, right? I expect you to behave in public. I expect these things. Spouses, if your spouse is placing high expectations on you, thank your lucky stars, because they love you enough to do that. Because that's what love does. Love looks at your spouse and says, I'm going to expect something out of you, buddy. That's what love does. Ask yourself about God's love to us. Does God expect you to be average, mediocre, a failure? Is that his expectations of you? Is that what Christ expects out of you? The greatest act of love ever demonstrated, Brother Mike pointed this out in his sermon, was when God gave his son on the cross to die. It was not an accident, and God did not fall into it. It was planned from the foundation of the world that he would give his son. It was calculated and thought out, and a decision was made to do it. That's what love is. It's not always soft flower petals and pretty music. Sometimes it says of the grandkids, I told Warren Saturday, you can run twice as fast as you are. That's a high expectation, and I know he can. He can be better than he is. I've told that to Silas and Briar and all of them. Briar won an award recently. I know I'm going a little over. I'm about done. Briar won an award at school recently, and I told her, I said, well, most kids don't do very well, and so you have just risen above, average, or however I said it. You have just risen above the misery of the masses in winning this award. Which is, for crying out loud, she won an award. Can't you celebrate it with her? Well, yeah, but also there's expectations that there's so much more left on the field that can be accomplished, right? So much more that can be done. Love, if you love your spouse, expect from them. Demand it. Have nothing less. And when your spouse comes at you with that, know this. They're doing that because they love you. Now, I'm spending some time on this because this is where a lot of conflict starts. One spouse places expectations on the other spouse, and the two buffaloes are now at it, and they should not be. That's precisely when your spouse is demonstrating some of their greatest love to you, is when they say, I expect more. I expect more. Spouses, when it's time for you to do that, when it's time for you to expect more out of your spouse, try to avoid doing it like this. I expect a lot more out of you. That one doesn't work. Do it a little bit more calmly. Husband, wife, I expect better. I expect you to be more. Say it in a way that when they hear it, they can't help but understand that it came from a place of love. That's where it came from. Love sets the bar high and has high expectations for the other. Love endures all things. It's like that beam in the building that holds up. One of my favorite country songs, I'm going to read the lyrics slightly modified. Through the dust and the smoke of this man-made mine walked a giant of a man that the miners knew fine. Grabbed a sagging timber, gave out with a groan, and like a giant oak tree, he just stood there alone. Big John. With all his strength, he gave a mighty shove. Then a miner yelled out, "There's a light up above," and with 20 men scrambled from a would-be grave, and now there's only one left down there to save Big John. I love that song. Not because of Jimmy Dean that wrote it or sang it, but because of the moral that's underneath it. The idea that sometimes a person has to rise to the occasion to be that guy who steps up under that beam and pushes with all his might and holds it up. Spouse, it may be you in your marriage. You may be the one that has to be that beam holding up the house. And so with a mighty groan, give out a shove, and you'll save your marriage. Maybe it's you. Ideally, it should be both. But sometimes it falls to one or the other because that's what love does. Love grabs the beam and pushes up and says, I'll save this marriage. If I have to put it on my back, I'll save it. Because it's too important for this marriage to look like the gospel. Love never fails. You know, faith will fail. When Christ appears in the clouds and we see him as he is, our faith will become knowledge. There'll be no more faith. You know, hope will fail someday because hope will become expectations realized. Our heavenly reward will be our possession. There'll be nothing more to hope for. And so many other things will fail. Disappointment and brokenness and a million other things in this world will fail. But love is eternal. It never fails. And if you're struggling in your marriage and conflict resolution is part of it, know this. Love will not fail. The only question is, will you fail to love? Hope you've enjoyed the study this morning. Love says, I won't blow up. I'm just what you need. I'll learn to like what you like, and I've got you covered. And you can trust me, and I know I can trust you, and I will trust you. And I will hold you accountable, and you can hold me accountable. I will hold you up, and you know what? This is going to work. It's going to work. This is going to work because love never fails. I hope you've enjoyed the study this morning. This is another installment in our Family Life series, and I look forward to the continuation of this. I think we've got a couple more to go. We can help you this morning in any way. Obey the gospel, request for prayers from the church. Any way we can help you, we stand ready to do that. If you'll come forward and have a seat on the front while we sing this song, we will assist you.